inspire.
Welcome back to Starting Now. I'm your host, Jeff Sarris. This is the show where I talk to entrepreneurs to reveal the unexpected paths to entrepreneurship. Today, my guest is Tim Stoddart. In this episode, we dive into Tim's story, his origin story from starting his personal blog many years ago and how it morphed and adapted into documenting his journey with sobriety. And it became Sober Nation, which became a very popular blog that then led him to build his business, which is around SEO and connecting healthcare providers with people. And it's a great story. It's really valuable to see how someone who he started a project for himself. It was a very important thing for him to do. But then he found this path, this thread that led him into entrepreneurship in a way that can really help the community that he set out to contribute to in the first place. It's a great story, great conversation. And without further ado, my conversation with Tim Stoddart. So to start out, sort of how do you describe what you do? Sort of what's the little elevator pitch of who you are right now?
Wow. Well, like I said, Jeff, thank you so much for having me. I listened to your episode with Brian Clark, and I just thought you were a great interview, and I've been a fan ever since. So Tim Stoddart, if I have to describe like what it is that I do, I suppose I'd say that I'm a writer. First, all of my companies, all of my hobbies, who I am when I'm not working, has all been centered around writing. But as time goes on, I've found ways to, transition writing into different skills that allow me to make a business, so I've become a pretty good SEO, and obviously, SEO requires good writing, but I'm not really sure that they're like synonyms in a way. But when I think of writing, I think more of storytelling, whereas SEO can be a little bit more technical. But it's definitely allowed me to do what I love to do in a way that also can provide for myself and grow a cool company. So I think I'm a writer first. I think I'm an SEO second, maybe. And then I think I think I'm really good at like systems. I get off on that in a way. I think it's really, really fun to see like a big mess, if there's a big mess of wires behind a computer or something like that, I'm on my hands and knees, like taping them all,
That's
and
me exactly
underneath.
Also.
Yeah. Like I need it to work that way. And so I think that strange, like idiosyncratic personality trait of mine has done well from like an operations standpoint, because I just like to solve those little puzzles. So yeah, that's my career in a nutshell. I know that's very matter of fact to to my entrepreneurship life, and obviously there's more to me than that. But if I had to like define what it is about me that makes a good entrepreneur, I'd say it's probably those three things.
Would you say that you're a problem solver then? Because like I consider myself a problem solver almost above everything else, and sort of thinking about like cleaning up the mess, like really approaching that the systems of making things better. Do you consider yourself a problem solver?
For sure. I think this is just another way of saying the same thing, but I've thought a lot about this. I don't want to get too heady, but the more and more I think about what it means to be a problem solver, it's a decision maker, because that's like the hardest thing to do, right? Because if you make a decision, you either were right or you were wrong. And either way, you have to sort of live with that. And so I think I've gotten better at it, because being the person, being the person to say like, no, this is the direction we're heading, I think takes, it takes courage, but it also takes just that ability to go in regardless if you're right or wrong, because it's better to make a decision and be wrong than like not make a decision and be right, So I would absolutely consider myself a problem solver, but I know it's kind of meta. I've actually just thought about this concept a lot. I think being a problem solver is equal to being like a decision maker in some way or another.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because I mean, all problem solving is a bunch of small decisions or large decisions along the path to get there. So your company now, actually, you mentioned Brian Clark, and you have your company, which is Stodzy. Is that
Stodzy? Yeah,
yeah?
you nailed it.
And then you're a partner at Copyblogger. So just sort of for the landscape, for anyone sort of new who hasn't come across your work before, just describe sort of Stodzy and the size of the company and whatnot, and then how Copyblogger fits into the fray.
I would be happy to. We can go like the short version or the long version of it. Which
Yeah,
do you think people
I'd
would
say
like?
just the short version to start, because then I like to rewind and go through your origin story and sort of how we got to where we are
Cool.
today.
Excellent. Well, Stodzy is an agency. We're a we've grown into more of like a robust digital agency, but we started as a content marketing SEO agency. Basically, everything I know about online marketing, well, the foundation of what I know about online marketing, I learned from reading Copyblogger every day over the last 10 years, but especially year one through like year 5 or 6, right? And Copyblogger was always just a huge influence in my life. Um, it was my education, really, and not even my education. It was proof that, like, oh, I get it. Like, this is a possible thing, because when you see the world of entrepreneurship and there's all the gurus and stuff like making it look so easy, I needed that. I needed just some real quick systematic, well, maybe not systematic, like tangible steps to take that made it seem like, oh, like this is a thing that I can actually do. And so I built Stodzy really off of the back of Copyblogger, just taking what I learned and executing it. I've been fortunate enough that I've stuck around with Copyblogger and eventually got to meet Brian Clark, who was like a real idol of mine. And then was in a position where I was able to come on board with the company, or something like I'm really, really proud of, and still have to kind of pinch myself sometimes because it's like a funny thing to idolize like a website about writing. It's like, well, who are your heroes? It's like, oh, you never heard of him. Some guy named Brian Clark. He writes blog articles, But
I
yeah, to the
personally, I totally relate to that though, because like we
sure.
both we came up around the same time, and Copyblogger was such a key part of like me making the leap to entrepreneurship, honestly, because like you said, he showed the roadmap. He showed where you can get to. Maybe not roadmap. Roadmap is probably too specific, but he showed how you can make it on your own through doing things like copywriting and content marketing and all these things. So yeah, it's like he's always gonna have like I feel like a place in a lot of people's hearts as like, oh, you helped me along this path, whether we've ever met, whether we've ever interacted before, sort of in a deep way or not. Yeah, it made a big impact.
A huge impact. And that's why I really remain super, super grateful to just be a part of it because, well, you said it, like it had a huge impact on my life. And I'll never forget that. I really make sure I live in like a space of gratitude. And so now, yeah, that's where I am now. Copyblogger is part of my life and I love it.
Yeah, and what's your role in it? Because you're like a partner of Copyblogger now.
Sure. Yeah, that's a really great question. I guess I should like define my official title at some point or another. Um, we're pretty lean. Like Copyblogger sold a lot of its assets, so like we don't have Studio Press, we don't have Rainmaker platform or anything anymore. And I'm happy about that, really. Like those are the kind of toys that I have the most fun with. And so if we were a bigger company, you would probably consider me the CEO. I think legally I would be the CEO, but that feels a little funny because there's only 4 of us.
Hmm.
But regardless, it's a leadership position in which I have a huge role in like the day-to-day operations of what we're building, how we're building it, and how we're building a business out of it.
Yeah, and I love that it's gone back to its core, to its roots,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't know that. It warms my heart. I love that because that, like we
Nice.
said, it meant a lot to us on our path. And then it became a big company with a lot of different moving parts. So maybe the content marketing side became a little less prominent. Not much. It's always been so important. But now I like that it's back to the forefront. So yeah, it's really exciting. But now, just to sort of rewind, and who were you maybe early days, like growing up, teenager, like who did you see yourself as? Did you see yourself as an entrepreneur? Were the people in your life that sort of had an entrepreneurial lean, or is this something completely new for you?
Great question. I was born in Philadelphia. Part of my story, which I think is always important, is that I had like really young parents. And so my aunts and my uncles, and I'm the first of my cousins. So I was always surrounded by family, and my aunts and uncles were almost like brothers and sisters just as much as they were aunts and uncles, just because like we were closer in age than most would be. And so I think I had that spirit of adventure just because I was kind of treated like a grown up a lot, even as a kid. My parents were super laid back. Like I was definitely not attached to, well, there weren't cell phones back then, which is so crazy to say because I'm only 35, but it's just a different world. Like I would just go play. And when I heard my mom whistle, that meant I had to come back for dinner. So I was always very, very like adventurous and jumping off of trees and high energy, as you can probably tell. Every time I do a podcast, I'm like talking too fast, Tim. just just because I got so much energy. Um, but as I grew up, I was like a skateboarder. My ultimate hero was Tony Hawk, and still, even till this day, since we were talking about heroes, I just thought everything Tony Hawk did was the coolest thing I've ever seen in my life, and I thought I was going to spend my life being a skateboarder. And through that, I was always pretty entrepreneurial. Like I would read CCS magazine and see all these kids that were building like little media brands. And I didn't necessarily understand what it was back then. I just knew that whatever I was going to do was going to be my own path, right? I've never been fearful of going my own route. So, that didn't necessarily lead for like the best experience in school or college. I didn't go that route. But as soon as I was able to, I started my own business. I had like a landscaping business in high school, and I was making some good money over the summer, and got into contracting and built houses for years and years and years, and had a contracting business on the side. But it really wasn't until I discovered the internet and I discovered SEO that I saw like that potential for scale. Like I come from a real blue collar family. My mom was an ER nurse, and my dad was one of the guys that threw the suitcases into the belly of planes. And so I thought of work as in like an hour's worth of work for an hour's worth of pay. And even in my own business, I still saw it that way, right? It was just like I can do it on my own time and just have my invoices, have my name on the invoices, right? But the internet, as is the case for a lot of people, opened up this world to like scalability and media and just like full-fledged ability to monetize off of creativity. And as soon as I discovered that, man, like I never looked back.
Yeah, for sure. Did you ever have a proper job, or were you always on your own?
I worked. I was mostly always on my own. The most proper job I ever had was working for a guy named Mike Thornton, who was a carpenter, and took me under in a lot of ways during like a really, really rough time in my life. And I'm so grateful to that guy. I don't think I would have been able to actually be an entrepreneur if I didn't have like those 3 or 4 years of just you got to be here at 7 a.m. type mentality, right? Like I don't care if it's raining. I grew up in Philly, right? So I don't care if there's 2 feet of snow. Like you're here at 7 a.m. and we do our job because that's what we get paid to do. And he really instilled that. My father instilled a lot of that in me as well, but there was still something about just a little bit more of the hard nosed type mentality that Mike Thornton taught me about that really, really helped. yeah, other than that, I had a couple other gigs where I was just like desperate, and had those moments was like, oh, I guess I need to, guess maybe this isn't right for me. I guess I just got to go get a job. But every time I did that, I always ended up getting fired or quitting within like 2 or 3 weeks. So,
Yeah, you just know it's not a fit. Like you knew, it sounds like
yeah.
you knew from an early age sort of intrinsically where you were heading. You just didn't know how you're going to get there yet, because we never do. It's always so
Mm-mm.
it's fuzzy, but that mentorship and that almost apprenticeship that you had with that gentleman was probably just so important, because that's important for all of our journeys. Like we need someone to help guide us at moments that we otherwise just we don't really have that direction maybe.
Yeah, it was so important. And you know what? The other thing that was really cool about it is I've developed some like mental comparisons between, I feel like everything you need to know in life you can learn from building houses. And I there's so many lessons it taught me where I'll see something that has like nothing to do with contracting, but the comparisons I pull are still the same. It's like, oh, I get it. Like there's no foundation on this. We're like, oh, I get it. They used this kind of tool when they need to use this kind of tool. And so the the building blocks of society in a way, I always see through the lens of what is required to build like a proper long-standing house that can withstand the rain and can withstand the blizzards and doesn't leak when you flush the toilet, stuff like that. So it was a huge experience in my life.
Yeah, I really like that a lot. And how did that play in then as you were building your business?
Well, websites are nothing but houses. Like they're just digital. It's every website, especially in SEO, needs a foundation. If the foundation isn't built, the framing of the website is just going to fall apart. Once you have the framing, you can't start adding in the walls and the paint and the windows, right? Unless like you're framed it properly. So and I can keep going. I'm not trying to like geek out on you too much about it, but we internally at Stodzy, like we really have part of like our culture almost when there's a problem we need to solve and we talk about it, those comparisons continuously come up where it's like, oh no, like the framing on this website is off, like the walls are falling down. Let's say there's some corrupt code in the HTML or something like that, just an example. So like there's a ton of comparisons, and I think what it does is it keeps us honest, because when you're building a house, like if you don't build it right, it will just not work. Like there's no life hacks to proper contracting. There's no like morning routines or any of that like type of shit. It's just, did you build it right? And if you did, it's going to last. And if you didn't, then it's not. And so I think it's really helped a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. So as you were growing then, because I assume it started probably just as you, how did you know when it was time maybe to bring people in? Because now it's a pretty big company, it sounds like.
Yeah, well, I would have to go back a little bit for that to tell how the origin of it all happened. Truth be told, Stodzy came about by accident. It was like an opportunity that I saw. My first ever experience was in Florida. So it's always a little bit strange that my story has like this particular idiosyncratic portion to it. But I had a terrible addiction problem and had to get sober. And so I basically like got shipped out to Florida because I had a cousin who lived in South Florida who was also in recovery. And during like my first couple of months of trying to get sober and like get my life back together, I came across an issue of Success Magazine. And it was only like 11 years ago, which is so crazy to say, but Success Magazine used to have these CDs in them with the interviews. And just by happenstance, the CD was of Seth Godin. And I don't even really remember the interview. I know that it was when like Purple Cow was coming out. And so idea virus type shit was floating out there. But at the end of the interview, the interviewee asked him, so like, the old, if you had to give a piece of advice where to start, what would you say? And he said, start a blog, don't tell anybody about it, and write in it every day. So that's just what I did. I like didn't have any goals or anything like that. I was like, well, this guy seemed really cool, and he told me to start a blog and not to tell anybody and to write in it every day. And so I would just write about the most random stuff. I would write about my day, or like how I was feeling trying to be sober when that was like the last thing I ever did in my life, or if I was like scared about stuff, or even just random stuff. Like I remember writing an article about how to make a perfect peanut butter and jelly sandwich, and eventually people started finding my website. And that was how I discovered SEO, because remember, I didn't tell anybody about it. Like I didn't tell a single person about it. And 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 that's when it clicked. So eventually that website turned into my first ever business, a website called Sober Nation, which is it's still probably till this day. I always hesitate when I say this because I don't know if it's true, just because I've never done the research, but I think it's still the biggest like recovery community on the internet, which basically probably means worldwide. And it was through building Sober Nation that I understood what it meant to have like an online community. And eventually I started getting approached by behavioral healthcare facilities. Like, how did you grow this group of people? And in my mind, I wasn't doing anything other than sharing my story and giving other people a platform to share their own story. Right. And so just through some of the stuff that I was learning from Seth Godin and through the stuff that I was learning with Copyblogger, I like accidentally built this really great brand around an industry that other businesses need services for. And so after like the third facility approached me like, hey man, how did you do this? Like, can you help us? By happenstance, coincidence, or fate, or whatever you want to call it, there was a guy named Mike Ramsey who wrote an article on Moz. It was like a super huge guide back when this was back when it was just Moz.org, it wasn't even, or when it was SEO Moz, excuse me.
Yeah.
When it was SEOMoz.com. And this article talked about how Mike Ramsey wanted to start an agency, and then one of his mentors said there's like 30,000 agencies out there, like why would somebody ever choose you? And it was right then that he knew he had to be specific, and so that's why he decided to start a local agency. And since then he's still a really successful guy. His agency is Nifty Marketing, and they do only personal injury law, so they got even more specific, right? And when I read that article, it just totally clicked on me. It was like, oh my God, like I totally get it. There's such a huge need for this service out here for behavioral healthcare facilities who are trying to get the word out that they can help others with addiction, And so I just went for it, man. And that was more than 10 years ago. And we've been doing it ever since.
Yeah. And I love that it came from such a personal place that like you started the site, like I know it was like the fourth dimension, right? And that was your blog that morphed into Sober Nation. And how then did it become a business? So I know the SEO part, but you mentioned Sober Nation was sort of your first business. Was there anything particular like service wise you were offering through there, or really building the community that just was something people could connect to?
Well, it was both. And I'm so glad you asked this question because sometimes when people ask me questions, whether it's like mentorship or something, and I'm sure you can relate to this as a guy who's like seen some success, you have to say, you keep trying and you'll figure it out. And the truth of the matter is that Sober Nation was a complete failure over and over and over and over again. Like nothing I did worked. I thought I could just sell banner spots on it because that's how you made money on the internet 10 years ago. Like the whole thing was banner spots. But then I quickly discovered that means that you spend most of your time selling and like none of your time creating content. And so, I tried to put a directory on it. And then I thought, I mean, man, I can go on and on about all the things I tried that failed. And so in a way, Sober Nation was just like this proxy to get me to Stodzy. And then through Stodzy, I was able to become like a real professional. And I discovered that the way to make money in an industry is just to figure out a way to provide what people really want. And it's really not harder than that, because I think a lot of times as entrepreneurs, we say like, this is the thing that I want to give the world. And sometimes that works. But the reality is that in a lot of instances, it's exactly the opposite, where you're saying like, what is it that people need? And then figure out work backwards how to get it to them. And while working with facilities, it was always the same thing. Like, we don't want advertising. We don't want to do any of that. We just need people who need help to call us. And that's it. Like, it really was that simple. So through the banner ads and the ads and, like, you know, the different levels of membership and like the yellow pages and all of the crazy ideas I had, eventually it came down to the fact that, like, no, if I'm going to help the people that need these resources, the best thing I can do for them is just give them a direct access to a facility that can help them. And so eventually we built a network of like regional phone calls, basically, where certain advertisers will pay for, you know, phone calls that are generated from like this part of the country, this part of the country, this part of the country. And, you know, that only happened a couple of years ago. And so it really did. I'm not bullshitting when I say this. It really took like 9 years to figure out how to even turn it into a business. But ever since then, it's been great.
Yeah. I mean, and you have that deep connection to it because it plays such an important role in your life and in your story and your journey that it keeps you going until you find that thing that makes it click together. Because you already had, it sounds like you had the traffic, you had the inbounds, but then how do you make this an endeavor that can be self-sustaining? Because like it costs time and money to run something like that, especially when it's when it grows to a certain level where it's like, okay, there's more here that I need to focus my attention on, but I can't take away completely from Stodzy or now Copyblogger even to focus on it. So it's great because it's a great example, I think, of not throwing away a thing because my focus is here now. Like, I see that a lot with people. They're like, oh, now I am this. So like NFTs are huge now, and people are like, oh, I am an NFT this, I'm an NFT that. And I'm like, what about everything else you've done? You didn't need to like flick all those switches off. Like, those are still important parts of your journey, and maybe playing a very important role, like Sober Nation, in the lives of many people. And yeah, I think that's really valuable to keep things around and not ditch them because maybe it's not to the degree that we might want, you know?
I totally agree with that. I think if you and I like hung out for a while, we would find a bunch of like methods or like an ethos or whatever that you and I both agree with. I'm lucky in that recovery teaches me how to really not care about instant gratification. And I use even more than lucky, like I'm fortunate that the worst experiences in my life led to such great changes in perspective, because for me, that's really been the trick. Because when you're getting sober, everything is on like the process, you know, like trust the process. Don't worry about the end result, because in recovery, like there actually is no end result. Like you never get like a certificate, right? Like you just keep going the next day and the next day and the next day until ultimately like you live a happy life. And I was able to take that lesson and just apply it to creating content and driving traffic and making people happy, where like I don't need to have it all figured out right now, because even when I think I do have it figured out, something else is going to change, which is going to flip the script on me anyway, you know? So I'm so fortunate in that, like you said, I've never needed something to work out right now, because that just gives me the space and the perspective to just keep on tweaking the process. And then, you know, 10 years from now, you look back and you're like, damn, that shit really worked. And I never even tried to make it work. It just turned into something that was valuable. Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I love that. And so on to Stodzy then. So when you were launching, you essentially, it sounds like you found that overlap. Like your client base sort of became, or Sober Nation sort of became your client generator, it sounds like. Is that a good explanation?
For sure, at least in the beginning, because Sober Nation just had such brand equity. But I never relied on it. You know, I'm very proud of the fact that Stodzy generates its own clients through SEO. One of the pet peeves of mine, and you know, I don't want to like bash anybody, but it doesn't upset me as much as I kind of just roll my eyes on it, is like all the SEO agencies in the country that when you look at their websites are just like complete shit, you know? And it's like, well, I don't get it. If you can't do it for yourself, how can you do it for anybody else? And
Exactly.
so it's really meant a lot to me that that like so it's always my favorite when people call me, because people are reluctant, because SEO agencies all over the time, or excuse me, all over the place, burn people on like hype, right? And so they say, well, how do I know this is going to work? And so I say, well, like, well, how did you find me? And I say, well, I found you on Google. I'm like, okay, so I know what I'm talking about, right? Um, so forgive me, let me get off my soapbox a little bit. But yeah, in the beginning, Server Nation just created some awareness for what I was trying to do. But through Copyblogger, really, I was very, very deliberate about understanding that there's a small but potent audience for people that want to learn how to grow healthcare facilities online. Because healthcare, even today, is very archaic. I mean, in a lot of different ways, but even in marketing, you'd be surprised. The whole entire thing relies on referrals between other professionals, you know? And so there's, you know, like multi-billion dollar industries that still don't spend a dime on digital marketing. And so, I was just very deliberate about it. Like, let me write in this blog about healthcare marketing. You know, let me send out emails that give advice for the tiny little outpatient facility of like a mom and pop that, you know, treat like 6 people a week and do group meetings and have no budget for it. And let me just tell them, like, no, if you do this, people in your local area will find you when they need you and they'll call you and you can serve them. So it was a very small audience, but I spoke directly to them. And, you know, over years and years and years, it compounds until it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah, having your niche is so valuable because it really you can carve out your lane so much better than just being I'm this for everyone. Like, have you ever considered or dabbled in expanding the niche, or has that been the lane that you stuck to?
Man, what a great question. And this again is like a Seth Godin thing that taught me. And I've since gone a little bit further with my own thoughts, because Seth Godin has this idea about a race to the bottom. Whereas unless you have a very specific person that you're talking to, he says it a little differently. So Seth Godin would say, don't race to the bottom. And on my walks, as I've thought about it, I've expanded it into racing to the bottom means being generic. It means appealing to everybody. And the only things that can appeal to everybody are the only differentiating factor you have if you're trying to appeal to everybody is to be the cheapest. And in today's world, like, you will never out cheap Amazon. You know, like, you'll always be in second or third place, or probably 10th or 20th place in being the cheapest. And that's just the absolute worst place you can be. So, so yeah, I'm a huge, huge proponent in being specific. And I'm always weary. It's fear-based, really, when you get specific and you say, I want to talk to these people, because what you're doing is you're also saying, like, I don't want to talk to these people. So then what happens when, you know, your brother's friend's cousin or something finds out that you are a web designer and they have some random website that they need for some really random business that has nothing to do with the people that you serve? Like, you need the courage to tell that person, like, no, I'm sorry, this isn't for you. And it's a real short-term, like, kick in the gut, but it's a real long-term growth factor, which will absolutely 100% pay off.
Yeah, defining who it's not for is just as valuable as defining who it's for, because it really that sort of calibrates your compass and sets you on the journey that you're sort of poised to be most successful on. You mentioned going on your walk and working through the concept. Do walks play a big role in sort of your day-to-day, like your entrepreneurial sort of vibe?
Oh yeah, fitness in general plays a big role. I've always gone for nightly walks, especially. So when I lived in Florida, I mean, geez, the more I think about it, I've gone for nightly walks like every day for almost 10 years. But there's a little bit more to it than that because I was an endurance athlete for a lot of my life. I just loved cardio. You know, I loved the idea um, that everybody else would quit before me just because I had like the endurance capacity. And I know that sounds very ego driven and it probably was, but I really loved it too. Like I just love those late night sweaty runs when it's dark and you got your headphones in. I really loved it. But a couple of years ago, I think from all the running, I had a terribly herniated disc in my back, and so I had to get back surgery to fix it. And I haven't been able to run ever since, and it's been like a real change in my life. Um, I've since switched it up for a rowing machine, and I've fallen in love with the rowing machine as well. However, there's still something about that just alone, peaceful nighttime stroll that I need. I can't even tell you why I need it. I really do. And yeah, like a lot of my best thoughts and even a lot of my best like mental cleansing. Sometimes the purpose isn't to think, you know, sometimes the purpose is just to let all of the gibberish in my brain filter its way out. So yeah, man, I couldn't tell you how important that's been in my life.
Yeah, it sounds like a meditation for you.
For sure. I read this book by RZA from the Wu-Tang Clan a while ago called The Tao of the Wu. And I remember he was talking about this thing. He was going through a tough time. And so he would go for walks around Staten Island all the time. And he came up with something that always stuck with me. He said, meditation is simply when your mind and your body are connected. And that always stuck with me. I was like, oh, wow, what a great way to think about it. You know, so whether you're just focusing on your breathing or whether you're just focusing on your pace in a run, it's that zone, right? And I think that's another reason why I liked cardio, because when you're doing cardio, like you don't have any space in your head to think about anything other than nothing, you know. And it's like one of the only places where I've been able to find that. And as soon as I read that, it always really stuck with me. Meditation is any time that your mind and your body are connected.
Yeah, I like that a lot because, yeah, it's so true. Because we try to think, we're not even trying to get to a point of not thinking and not having thoughts. We're trying to just release them, let them do their thing. But it's hard. It's so hard to get there, right? I mean, especially like sitting when it's like just sit in a chair and just whether it's a breathing meditation or whatever one's meditation of choice is, we can almost be self-defeating at times because it's hard to let go and be like, no, it's fine to be thinking about things. We just need to come back to our center at some point in that process.
It's so cool. And I think that's a big misconception about meditation where people think it's about stillness, and it's actually not. It's about like observation. It's about observing yourself and not judging yourself. That's why do you ever go to float tanks?
I have not done a float tank, but I'm very curious about it.
Yeah, they're rad, man. It's not the like endless void black hole that people are scared it is. It's really not at all. You're very aware, and like you can just stand up and walk out anytime. You know, you're not going to get stuck in this this black hole. But yeah, that's really helped where you can just almost step away from your thoughts and just observe them passing. And then you have the chance to like, oh, wow, like, why did I think that? As opposed to, oh, I got to stop thinking. You know, like I need my brain to be still. I need my brain to be still. It's much more for me. It's much more beneficial just to allow my thinking to happen and then not judge myself, which is difficult.
Oh yeah, for sure, for everyone. And for a float tank, then just quickly as an aside, can you just describe that, because it's essentially a very salt heavy water that you can float in a little container, right?
Yeah, and the containers are much. That's exactly it. It's a tank, but they're much bigger than people think. There are ones that are like pods, which are small. I've never been in one of those ones. The ones that I'm in, it's like the size of a locker. Basically, you can stand up in them. And yes, it's very salt. It's a mixture of water and salt, which basically keeps you at a perfect buoyancy. And the solution, I guess you could call it, is heated to your exact body temperature. And when you close the door, it's complete darkness. So it takes some time because you don't even realize that you're not relaxing until you like start really breathing out, and like your neck and your shoulders and all that stuff just starts to sink. But you can't feel anything, and it's great. So like the water comes over your ears a little bit, so you can really just hear the sound of your breath, and it's like a really cool experience. I think everybody should do them at least once a month. It's I love it. I really really enjoy it from a meditative standpoint, but also there's something about just being in the solution and in the darkness that makes it much easier. You know, like how often do people try to meditate and then the cell phone vibrates or their dog barks and it's like, oh, I can't do this, let me stand up. It just forces you to be in the moment.
Yeah, and you essentially lose sensation of your edges, right? Because you said it matches your temperature, you're floating, so you're not actually touching anything. So it's sort of, that's why people think maybe of like a void or whatever, because it's pitch black and there's no sensation necessarily.
That's exactly what it is. What a great way to describe it too. You lose your edges, like you lose a little bit of the distinction between like you and the rest of the world. So yeah, man, I'm glad you asked me that question. I think float tanks are really, really beneficial. And and since we're talking about it though, the other thing that it does is we don't realize how much pressure is on our spine and our necks, even when we're relaxed. Because even when you're lying in bed, there's a point of pressure on you, like, you know, you're relaxing on the couch or something like that. In a float tank, it really is the only possible way where your head and like this part of your neck and your lumbar and even your shoulders are just completely relaxed without them having to adjust to, you know, like the cushion of the couch or your pillow or something. And so if you spend an hour in a float tank just lying there, when you get out, your neck will feel more relaxed than it ever has. And you won't even realize, like, damn, I've been living my whole life with my shoulders up in my ears, you know? So that's like a real hidden benefit that has been helpful to me too.
Yeah, definitely. And I saw that you were more into lifting, and you're doing like a pull-up challenge right now, I saw.
Oh yeah, you saw that?
Oh yeah. Well, yeah, I like to dig in a little bit and see what's going on like right now, a little window into it, which is awesome. Like, congrats, because that is like, pull-ups are a big challenge. Like, fitness plays like a big role in my life too. Just like you said, the meditation of the running. Like me, it's always been lifting. Like, not, I was bigger at one point, like more muscle mass at one point, but it's not really that focus anymore. It's more just the meditation of it. This is actually my gym. I have a squat rack literally right here. You can't see it from there, but yeah, I just rearranged the room for recording these episodes. But yeah, this is sort of my little domain that's like office, gym, recording studio, everything. But yeah, I can totally relate. And I think it's important to have those things outside of entrepreneurship, because entrepreneurship is the sport. Like, to me, it's that competitive like sport, but then having something outside, I think is immensely valuable.
Man, like I said before, you and I could just hang out and really just vibe. I think I can't think of anything more important than to be healthy. It seems so smack in the face obvious, you know, because, and then what's the trap, right? You spend your whole life working for these things and then you lose your health. And then suddenly you realize that without your health, nothing else even matters, because when your health is the problem, like, it's the only problem you have. And so it always just, yeah, it discourages me a bit that health isn't more a part of like the vernacular in our country and our society. And I find it very confusing, because if I go 2 days without moving around a little bit, like, I feel like shit. And I think to myself, I'm not special. Like, I just have a body like everybody else. Doesn't everybody just feel like achy and squirmy and stuff? And so yeah, my pull-up challenge has been fun. You know, it's been an adjustment to actually have like muscle on me. I was always like the skinny runner kid that could do like 15 pull-ups and, you know, jump squats and stuff. And so I've really enjoyed the process of just picking heavy stuff up. I've never been able to do that, you know, but along with that, if I do a pull-up, like, I'm pulling up 25 more pounds than I was when I was in that, you know, peak cardio hit fitness type thing. So it's cool. It's been an adjustment of like getting to know my body a little bit differently.
For sure. Do you feel like you get the same reward from lifting as you did from running? Because I've always been in the lifting camp, never in the running camp, and it is such a dramatic shift, like you said. Do you sort of feel the same rewards in the end?
Mm-mm.
Okay.
No, and that's why I still have the rowing machine. That's why I go to Muay Thai a lot as well. The runner's high is a real thing, and I get a lifter's high for sure. My wife is a lot more into lifting. And, frankly, I think with running, especially, there's some things about it that are detrimental. Like I'm almost positive that's how I herniated the disc in my back. But man, there's another side of me that thinks running long distance is the thing that we do better than any other animal in the world. Like human beings literally can run down horses if they just keep running. We can run down any animal ever just because we're the only ones with this weird cardiovascular system that makes it so that I'm not the best sprinter, but like I will just keep running and I will eventually run anything down.
Yeah, because persistence hunting is actually a thing where you're running until the animal has exhausted, but the human
just done.
Yeah, kept going.
That's exactly right. So I think there's some like internal reward mechanism for people after they get that sort of runner's high. And so I've supplemented it with the rowing machine, but also with Muay Thai classes, which I also find to be a ton of fun.
Yeah, for sure. And this has been great. I don't want to take too much more of your time. So
I got all the time, man. I'm having a blast.
Oh, nice. Like when someone is just starting out, like I know this is sort of a left turn out of fitness and everything, but I always like to just ask, because they call it starting now, because I think it's so important for someone to take the leap. Because like I wanted to start a podcast for like, I don't know, 8 years before I started this one. I started it in 2020, like so many other people did, because it was like, lockdown, all these things are happening. I should finally do this. And I just think it's so important to take the leap. So for someone who maybe has had this idea for whatever it might be for such a long time, do you have any advice on getting started, maybe like in a similar lane to where you are?
I do, actually. And the advice is not just start. I think that is very easy to say, but I think it's also very non-efficient, because I think the reason most people quit is because they just start and they can't see it going anywhere. And like, of course, it's always the people who have had success that spit out the things like, oh, you just got to keep going, you just got to grind it out and work harder. But when you're in the other side, that doesn't mean anything if, you've been at it for 9 months and haven't had like a single sale, And so like I said, I was fortunate in that I've learned these lessons from getting sober about like avoiding instant gratification and stuff like that. But if I wouldn't change a thing, but if I had another chance to redo my process, I would put a whole lot more emphasis into really, really, really thinking about what it is that you want. And I don't mean that from, like, oh, I want a jet and I want to be rich, right? It's not about that. Even if you just have a real specific outcome, really. Like I teach a lot of this stuff in Copyblogger, because so many content creators, especially writers, you just think, I'm just going to start writing. I'm just going to put my message out there and eventually something will happen. And that's not the case. So I think it's really, really important to define what it is that I want. So that could be, I want 1,000 email subscribers. That could be, I want to make $10,000 a month. That could be, well, who knows? That's up to the person to decide for themselves. But I think when you know what it is that you're working towards, it makes it a whole lot easier to make decisions, because then you can just say, is this decision going to get me closer to what I want? Or is this going to distract me from what I want? And I've wasted the culmination. I have no idea, like years probably, in doing things that weren't getting me any closer to what it was that I wanted, because I never actually took the time to decide, like, what do I want, And if there is one place to get started, I think it's taking a step back and being super, super honest. And I'm not talking about goals. I'm saying like, what do you want? And then once you know what that is, everything you do can be put through that filter. And if it's going to get closer, then do it. And if it's not, then don't, regardless of how fun it sounds or how cool it sounds or anything like that. If your goal is to get 1,000 email subscribers and your friend comes up to you about this cool podcast idea and like, we're just going to be a bunch of guys hanging out. Is that going to get closer to what you want? No. Okay. Then don't do it, because years down the line, like you'll be so much further ahead if everything that you do is down the path that you want to go.
Yeah, absolutely. Because we can get caught in that just sort of hustle cycle. Like, oh, I'll just do more. I do believe like doing things creates opportunity. But at the same time, if we're just doing like constantly every single thing that draws our attention, we're running towards that without a set goal, that it's just a recipe for failure, unfortunately.
Well, that's exactly right. And when I say it, you want to be matter of fact about it, but there's context in life. I'm not saying don't try new things or don't experiment with stuff or, don't give something a shot. It's just avoiding unnecessary effort and wasting unnecessary time, because our world has so many distractions. Like there are the smartest people in the world that get together in rooms on a daily basis and try to figure out ways to get you to stop doing what you're doing to do something else instead. And to avoid that, you have to be super, super deliberate with knowing what you're working towards.
Yeah, for sure. And just in the new shiny object sense, we talked a little bit about NFTs over DMs. What are your thoughts on NFTs right now? Where are you sort of in the space? You mentioned something about a story with mutant apes that you maybe...
Oh, man.
Yeah.
Broke my heart. I think they are super exciting. I spent weeks... The hardest I've ever worked on a piece of writing for my personal blog was on an NFT article, trying to just not necessarily talk about what they are. I think a lot of people get what they are now, but trying to understand how it's actually going to affect us all. So what do I think? I think playing with JPEG NFTs is a ton of fun. Although in the story that I told you, I literally clicked the wrong button and sold a mutant ape for 0.45 ETH, where I meant to sell it for 5.4 ETH, which doesn't sound like a lot. It's the difference of like $14,000.
Yeah.
So the good things and the bad things about blockchain are almost like really symbiotically represented in that simple mistake I made, because I have no idea who bought it. And that's great, but it's also not great because there's no customer service for the blockchain. There's no like, hey, shit, I clicked the wrong button, give me my mutant ape back. And so you got to live with that. But, really, when I think about NFTs, this is what I think about. I think about Fortnite players building multi-billion-dollar digital shoe businesses. I think about art museums that, let's go even weirder. I think about augmented reality events in which the real estate of the virtual space gets leased and rented out to advertisers. I mean, that's because you can do that. Like you can tokenize a space, you can tokenize the pixels within either a virtual reality world or even through like a Zoom world, it can still be a physical reality in an augmented, like code-based system, and the businesses. I think digital real estate is really, really fascinating. I think that's something that, from a practicality standpoint, there's like a high likelihood of that actually turning into something, right? Because as soon as there's going to be space, there's going to be people that want to sell ads against it, and I think that's like I think, who knows what's going to happen, but I can see that turning into something very, very quickly. I got a friend, his name is Jeff. He's pretty big into the NFT space. He's probably like a NFT celeb, whatever you call that. But he is working on a project now where he is building and selling digital artists. So, mind you, I didn't say digital art. He is creating actual digital artists that then create their own music, which can be tokenized and sold. Um,
So what does that actually mean then? Like sort of practically speaking.
right? Yeah, like does anybody know
Yeah.
the answer to that? I mean, basically, it means that computers can be their own autonomous businesses, create music, and sell that music in the form of a token to anybody that wants to lease it for a video game, to anybody that wants to lease it for a party. There's another guy that I like. His name's Drawer. He was on my podcast. He runs a newsletter, Drawer Poleg. I know it's hard to pronounce, DRORPOLEG.com. And he sees NFTs in a whole new way. So I never even thought about this, but once you do, it's so obvious. Celebs show up for like meet and greets all the time, right? Well, now that you can tokenize your time, why wouldn't a celebrity be like, hey, I will send you a gesture, right? Like I'll say hi to you. I'll make a tokenized piece of media that says hi to a certain person, and we can transact upon that gesture on a blockchain. So when you talk about NFTs, it's hard not to like go down a rabbit hole just because your brain starts thinking of all the different possibilities that it can be. But I think it's very, very obvious to anybody that's paying attention that tokenized JPEGs of monkeys has nothing to do with where NFTs are going to be 5 or 10 years from now.
Yeah, it's the early adopters. It's the way in to sort of test the waters, because even already what I find really fascinating is the in-person, the melding of an in-person experience with NFTs, whether if it's like just like Gary V's V Friends, it's a ticket into his conference. So if you have a V friend, you can go to the conference like 2 times or 4 times or whatever it is. But then there's other even smaller scale things where like Top Dog Beach Club, I don't want to say smaller scale, but essentially they're doing something where they're having like 2 beach parties a year. They've already done like in-person gallery type events and think for NFTs to like bring people in. And it's really fascinating because I do think there is, like you said, the digital space, and I think melding the tokenization of digital spaces around along with in-person experiences is, I think it's going to be this seamless transition where suddenly, like, what's an NFT? We don't even like care about that term anymore because it is just like, oh, this is just the app I use on my phone to get into this event. I don't have a paper ticket. I don't have these things, but I also have this ticket forever. I could sell it, transact on it later. It's very fascinating. Very fascinating time.
I totally agree with that. I think so. Here's something that I think is so interesting. When you look at the Jetsons, when we think about the future, we're always totally wrong. If you look at the Jetsons, they had flying cars and teleportation machines, but they were still doing their homework on pencil and paper. And I remember seeing that cartoon and thinking to myself, like, we have no clue what's going to happen. And I think that analogy played itself out, for me at least, with virtual reality, because 10 years ago, everybody was so convinced that the world is going to be virtual reality. But the more we've gotten closer to it, the more we've realized that people with like actual prefrontal cortexes get freaked out when you put something over their eyes and they can't see the sensations. They can't match all of their sensations together in an experience. And so I think NFTs are a way to, like you said, blend the actual world that we live in with digital worlds. And so that doesn't necessarily mean living in like this virtual reality world, otherworldly dimension. I think that means simple things, like selling houses. Mm-hmm. I think it means the middlemen basically are going to disappear, because how long is it going to be until somebody realizes, why am I paying 3% of this house to a broker that is completely unnecessary when there's there's a piece of code that can justify a transaction for me on a blockchain. So it's going to be stuff like that, stuff that when it happens is going to seem so obvious, but now like we just can't help but think of the world and in the Jetsons, right? But the Jetsons were doing their homework on pencil and paper.
Yeah.
So I just think it's so cool, the analogy there.
Yeah. This has been great. Like, thanks for taking the time out of your day. I really had a great time chatting, diving into your story and everything. Where should we send people to check out what you're up to and follow along?
Yeah, timstodds.com. That's my personal blog. I send a weekly newsletter every Friday because are you even a millennial if you don't have a newsletter? But I enjoy it. It's where I just get to write a little bit more about what I'm doing, if I'm traveling, if I'm thinking about anything. It's very business oriented at the same time. I'm a huge believer that our world is heading to a way where like everybody needs to fend for themselves. That sounds like Hunger Games-ish. I don't mean it that way. I just mean that it's like long tail. Like everybody has a unique thing that they can offer the market. And as our needs are met more and more through automation, it like frees up the space for creative monetization, And so I think it's important that people take that seriously. And so that's what I write about a lot, like different opportunities to build digital income streams, So timstodds.com, TIMSTODZ. And Jeff, thank you so much for chatting with me, man. I had a great time, and I appreciate you being patient with my with my ranting.
Oh no, this is good. This is really great. It's not ranting at all. I like diving into the stories. It's fun. I want to thank Tim for joining me on this episode. Be sure to head over to stodzy.com. That's STODZY.com to check out everything he's up to. As always, this episode of Starting Now is brought to you by Built. At Built, we help you get started online. Whether you want to start a blog or a business, head on over to built.co. That's BYLT.co to get started. Built, your website, built for you simply. Finally, if you're enjoying the show, be sure to subscribe on YouTube and give it a little thumbs up. That really means a lot and helps me reach new people. It's been steadily growing as of late, which really makes me happy, just seeing new people coming in and enjoying the show. So yeah, for everyone out there, thank you so much. And that'll do it for this week. Again, I'm Jeff Sarris. This has been Starting Now, and I'll see you next time.